Welcome everyone to the Flux Dev Meeting. It's March 6, 2025. Would anyone like to go first? Scott?
I would love to. I just wrote a topic in the dun, 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 in the thing, and then I guess now that you're recording, I'll put the doc link. Um, yeah, so my topic is basically we're working on Helm 4, and I know the Flux community. Well, basically, the Flux Helm controller is one of the I don't know if I can quite say it's the most robust use of the Helm SDK, but it's certainly one of, if not the. And we're trying to improve the SDK for Helm 4. And we're also looking at features for Helm 4 that matter to people, features for Helm that matter to people in Helm 4. And um, there's a faster, supposedly, well, we're really doing our best to have a faster um, development process for Helm 4 than we had for Helm 3. I mean, it was quite accelerated, but then, it did take a while. And so we're really time boxing that. And the idea is to have like somewhat fast releases. So to give this a year, we're where we're at now, just timeline. I mean, there's a Helm improvement proposal that outlines the timeline. But in short, by August, we want uh, let's say an alpha version. We're going to have basically a feature freeze for the first release, the first major Helm 4 release, and we're going to uh, it's going to be complete by the end of the year. Is the idea. But um, but so August is where we're going to basically say, okay, now we're going to stop. We're going to freeze for now, so we can like finish hardening, complete these things, and finish this first version. But if anyone has thoughts, whether it's now, uh, I'm all ears, and or coming up soon if you think about it. I'd really appreciate your feedback. Or we would all appreciate your feedback, both as users that if you've been looking at the Helm controller code that uses the Helm SDK, and it's the limitations that are there in Helm 3 or the problem points, or if you're just a Flux user and you use the Helm controller and you have any thoughts on how that could improve, or literally anything about that, we're all ears. And the way to give feedback, I mean, can be now. People can also join the Helm calls. I'm sure you have plenty of extra free time for all this kind of stuff. But there's also Kubernetes Slack. There's a Helm users or Helm dev channel, which is probably the best. And please feel free to ping me. I'm Scott Rigby, and I've got the same name in all the Slacks, CNCF and Kubernetes Slack. And if anybody doesn't know, I guess listening to the recording later or here, it's slack.k8s.io. Um, and yeah, just please reach out to me, either in DM if you wish. The Helm Dev channel is probably the best one. We are also looking for people to help test once the uh, once the you know pre-release first pre-release comes out in August. So anybody who wants to do that would really appreciate it. Um, Especially, yeah. So I'm reaching out to the Flux community. That's why I'm here right now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Scott, do you already have something out in Flux, or is this more like Helm specific that you're
It's
looking?
it's specific to Helm at this moment, but it will. I mean, I've been reaching out to other Flux maintainers directly as well, for feedback on different things. Um,
So from a Flux perspective or from a user perspective, is there any concise document that covers like what is the reason for Helm 4? I'm just
yes.
curious because Semver usually there's means a breaking change, right? So are there multiple breaking changes that are the impetus for Helm 4 or?
Uh,
Is there
yes,
one major one, or that's my question?
yes. Here is the Helm improvement proposal that outlines it. It also outlines, Helm 3 support, and all of those things. I realize this is a Flux call. I'm not trying to take it over for the Helm community. It's just that Helm is one of the important Helm users are one of the important user groups for Flux.
And
And
Helm controller is certainly an important part of Flux. We're
yeah,
very interested in what's happening in Helm.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really why I'm asking here. And I don't want to go over the scope of that for this Flux call. Um, but yeah, like so if you have thoughts within the scope of using Flux, that's really kind of what I'm asking here. But if you have other thoughts too, that's the information that I sent out to, reach out to me. And uh, even apart from Flux, I'm interested in that. But in this context, especially for Flux use cases.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm just taking a look at the HIP document that you sent.
Absolutely. In short, the biggest reason to go for another major version of Helm, we would never need to, but is to reduce technical debt that was incurred
Ah,
throughout the several years of Helm 3. You know, we're so focused on backwards compatibility, a very strict contract there, stricter than Kubernetes, is Helm has become a critical tool for infrastructure for a lot of the world and or the digital like cloud world. And one of the reasons that it's trustworthy is because we adhere so strictly to that, or we try to. Um, as Stefan has pointed out in not not too long ago, there have been things, especially for SDK users here and there, that have accidentally broken, and we do our best not to do that. But uh, in any case, because of that, even if there were bug fixes, um, uh, if there's any behavior that changes at all from a Flux user point of view, whether it's output, screen output or something like this, we rather than just fix them, we have to add extra flags so that what people are expecting, even if it's not consistent with other behavior or if it's not the way it ideally should be, we won't change that. We will, we'll allow users to opt into other functionality, even if they're fixes. Now, security fixes, that's a different story. We have to make changes. Those always can have breaking changes, security fixes if needed. But apart from that, we don't. And so because of that, we have the Helm commands you may have noticed have lots and lots of flags. So for Helm users, that means within within the Flux Helm release, there are also options that could be simplified in Helm 4 as well. So, and also because of that backwards compatibility uh, that I just mentioned, there's just tons and tons of code for that to adhere to that, new interfaces just so that we don't, accidentally update things and break someone, things that we can really consolidate and make clear. So that's the first one. And the second one is um, is actually changing some of the way things work to be more consistent and better, potentially grouping some of the commands in ways that are a little bit more sensible, because we can do that with a new major version. And ideally also the thing that I think is really important for Flux is to improve the SDK, make the SDK much better. So that will ideally make the Helm controller a lot more maintainable, um, and uh, and hopefully there will be new features as well that um, Flux users can look forward to. But yeah, if anything annoys you, maybe that's the thing. Just let that soak in your brain if you're a Flux Helm user and you're like, hey, what if we or ooh, it'd be really nice if I didn't have to X, Y, and Z. And I think that's it, Kingpin.
Cool. Great to have you here again today, Scott.
since you spoke about technical debt earlier, Scott, um, I'm just curious because a couple years ago, when I was working for Ericsson, we had what we called complex Helm charts that essentially were hierarchical and would deploy an entire ecosystem of applications. And those Helm charts worked really without a problem using Kubernetes that Ericsson had implemented. But when we tried to run the same charts using Flux, it produced an error, which we traced down to the marshalling and unmarshalling of JSON schema. I back then asked a question which I posed to the Flux community. And I understand that there were different implementations of Helm in the Kubernetes environment versus the Flux environment, if this is the right way of putting it. Is this
Gotcha.
going to be reconciled and streamlined going forward, or what's the plan there?
I'm actually not sure what you're I guess I'm just not sure what you're referring to exactly. So there was
Well,
there were what I heard was that there are complex umbrella charts.
or umbrella charts, yeah, that's what you would
Like,
call them officially, right?
yeah, that's what we officially call them. Charts with dependencies that may also have more
Yes.
dependencies, and they can be relatively complex. Um, it kind of depends on what you mean about what what didn't reconcile properly, and why. I could
And
think of
while
some
I'm not
reasons.
talking about any reconciliation
Oh,
concerning the problem that I ran into,
oh,
but taking a Helm chart that we used for some of the Ericsson applications, running it against Helm in the Kubernetes implementation that we used, that chart would deploy without a problem.
right,
But when we did the same thing under Flux control,
right.
there was a problem because it came back saying that the chart was invalid. And I
Invalid. Okay.
traced that to the marshalling and unmarshalling of JSON schema.
Ah, okay, yes. Um, well, there may be a reason for that. One of the my first thought of the reason for that is that JSON schema is there. It's basically Helm supports JSON schema um, for essentially validating what kinds of values can be passed to the values file, mainly because that was at that time the best way, um, the best way to validate YAML. Not just that it is valid YAML, but that it's, for example, you know, for a certain key, it has to be a numeric value between, 1 and 1,000 or something, or it can only be a string, or it can be, it's etc. So, or some other type, right?
And
Different kinds
if I
of
remember correctly, Helm 3 by default doesn't actually validate YAML
that's
strictly, right? I
that's what I was gonna say. It
there are
doesn't.
things like duplicate keys that Helm won't balk at that Flux will definitely balk at. I've seen that happen, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Kingdom. That's a really good point. That's one point. And then if it is in fact the JSON schema error, that those charts may have a JSON schema file that says what those values are supposed to be. But with Helm, you'd have to actually validate that yourself. And I think Flux does that for you automatically. So if you do, um, I'm actually just I'm very curious about it. I'd like to, what I would love, I don't know if you still have, if you have, uh, if you have a chart that, or if you can find a way to reproduce it in any way, if there's any way to share something like that, then that would be really valuable to Flux maintainers and I mean and for me as well. Like if there's
Yeah,
something,
I would have to reach out to
yeah.
my former Ericsson colleagues. There was someone in China that I worked with. She took those umbrella Helm charts and dismantled them and created Helm charts, simple Helm charts, if I may put them this way. And those then ran fine under Flux as well. But she may still have one of those umbrella Helm charts that gave us a problem,
Okay.
and can then get the authorization from the Ericsson company to share it with you.
That would be fantastic. Yes. And if specific details of that need to be redacted, or even if I have to sign an NDA, I'm a Flux, or I'm also a Flux community maintainer, so I could do that from the Flux project and a Helm maintainer. So um, we sometimes I've sometimes done that to look at and inspect charts that aren't meant to be public, and then I could work with you all to to hopefully find what piece of that would fail in Flux. If we can kind of like narrow it down to like it's, like the bare essentials in order to show to reproduce a problem, then we can actually surface that publicly as an issue. I'm not really sure an issue either in Flux or Helm, or tie them together, because it may be the case that is too aggressively checking something that may actually be okay. Um, I don't know that I don't know, or maybe that Helm is actually missing something, uh, some
Or
kind of check that.
it could even be that there's a secret flag in Helm that if you knew, you could get the same error in Helm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could exactly if you could if right either a certain process or a flag or
Like
something
we've
like
seen
that.
issues where
Yeah,
people wouldn't notice the problem until they turned on wait, and Flux maybe has wait on by default. So I think in Helm
exactly.
it
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
And that's good for me to know, because, or good for us to know too, because we are Flux also implements a certain type of weighting that that Helm doesn't do by default. For example, because Flux has controllers built on controller runtime and actually runs those in your cluster, and with Helm, um, you that's not really the way, the SDK, you can build that, but that's not what you get out of the box, especially with the Helm CLI. And so, for example, there is a pull request right now that's I believe it should be merged pretty soon, adding case status waiting to Helm. Flux has done this a while back and implemented that, but kind of around Helm, and now we're actually moving that into Helm. So um, if it's something like that, it could even be an error that would surface in Helm. So yeah, so this would be really helpful, Augie. I'd really appreciate that. Here's, by the way,
Hmm.
is a link to the schema files for anybody wondering what we're talking about, the JSON schema files. And I actually want to take back what I said before, because I was really just I was really just giving an it depends, and kind of not thinking as quickly as I should have about, Helm install should automatically validate if you have this. You shouldn't have to do that automatically. So just redact what I said there. Um, I think Kingman's guess is probably the best one I've heard so far. That maybe the dash dash wait could be it, but
I
um,
think it's a different issue than the one that I was, either of the ones that I were experienced, but um
the duplicate keys one, you mean?
yeah, but from a Flux
Yeah.
perspective, those are all pain points that if we could somehow um converge with Helm, I'm sure that would be good.
Yeah. Absolutely. I will say that I know that the Helm SDK was our best attempt when designing Helm 3 at giving an SDK. We didn't really know what users wanted, and it's certainly before in Helm 2, what you had to do in order to use it programmatically in Go code is people basically just like copy the commands code, most of it. It wasn't really something you could import and just use. And so that's why we created the Helm SDK. Um, I actually didn't write it. I was maintaining other parts of Helm at that time. And so other really brilliant people wrote it, but also we didn't have any real use. We knew that people wanted to use it, but we didn't have a lot of real world use cases like we have now in the year since. So
Just
Flux
for
has to
my
bend over.
education, are there other high profile users of the SDK that you can point to?
Yeah,
Flux?
definitely. Um, Rancher. Um, there are several I can think of that I know, but I can't think of at this moment. Um, several a number of different projects use it. Some open like CNCF projects, and others that are private or paid, cloud
I
projects.
would think it's in the operator framework too. That's all Helm driven, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, the operator framework. I actually need to put together a list. We need to it would be nice to put together a list. As you can see, I'm reaching out to people who are heavy SDK users, so that's to my advantage too. But we can talk, I guess we can offline that.
Yeah.
But uh to round out what I was just gonna started saying about this like little history note, it's only relevant because the Flux maintainers have bent over backwards in order to make very good use of the Helm 3 SDK, in order to like really deliver a stellar experience for Helm users in tied with Kubernetes reconciliation, like actually running Helm as a controller, where you can just sort of say, here's my declarations for what I want in terms of like a Helm release, and then Flux will use the Helm SDK to do ideally exactly what you would get as a Helm CLI user. The reality is that there's a lot of code written around that to make it work well because the Helm SDK is very limited. We know this now over time, and so that's why we're trying to fix it. And so that should, if as we collaborate with the Flux maintainers, it should improve. But we still want to hear from end users because you might have things that you're doing that Flux maintainers don't know about yet or aren't thinking about. Anyway, I feel like I took up too much of the pie, too much of a part of the pie, especially since I need to leave.
That's okay. Deepti, do you want to give an update about RFC 007?
Yeah, I don't have like I think I was working on a few enhancements for the notification controller, and I just sent out a pull request which enhances the authentication mechanism for GitHub commit status and GitHub dispatch. Not too much to share there. I think the pull request is there. It works whenever folks get time to take a look. Yeah, please share any feedback.
Great, thank you. I will be sure to take a look. Do we have anything else for the agenda, or should we end there? Going once, going twice?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.